Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to Walter's Wall of Woe here on the DiAmorte takeover of the station. I have Alcuin. I mispronounced that again, didn't I, sir?
No, you did. You got it. Alcuin.
Oh.
Alcuin Gersh.
Jeez, I am the band name butcher, so that extends to personal names as well. Alcuin, thank you very much for joining us today on the show. I appreciate having you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a game developer. You also do a lot of Twitch streaming. You've done things for Geek and Sundry, which Rick is very involved with. Tell us a little bit about your background, please.
I am a professional storyteller and games master. I'm a writer and developer. For role-playing games, basically, which are things like Dungeons and Dragons. I've done work with. I'm currently a player in a game that is streaming on Wizards of the Coast's official Dungeons and Dragons channel.
Awesome.
But I've also done stuff related to games set in the world of darkness, which is stuff like Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse. All sorts of gaming. I've played science fiction games, fantasy games, all those sort of things. And I do art, I do development, I do writing. Currently writing a book for Hunters Entertainment for their Outbreak Undead system, which is survival horror. And my book is a Dark Ages, not Dark Ages, late Middle Ages set survival horror game called Danse Macabre. And I've always been a huge fan of metal. And a lot of the themes and stuff that are in these games are, going to show up in metal.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's totally great. And yeah, I've played a little bit of, I've dabbled in the RPG world myself. I was big into Palladium's Rifts.
I read the books for that, but the only Palladium game I ever played back in the day was their Ninja Turtles game, which was excellent.
Yeah, they have a lot of great different concepts. It's not all just fantasy like D&D. Like you said, there's so many different genres of RPG that you can get involved with these days, and I love the Rifts dice system. I kind of compared to like the D&D. I know that the 5th edition's a little bit different and a little bit easier to play with these days, but now, like you said, you had a metal background. What kind of got you into metal?
Well, my parents are both professors of medieval subjects, and my dad does philosophy-related stuff, and my mom does linguistic stuff, but in many cases, particularly with the medieval period.
Okay.
And so I grew up around only like classical music at home.
All right.
I took piano for 10 years and music theory, and my parents were very interested in that. My dad plays the piano a huge amount. At one point, his ambition was to be a professional musician, and my grandfather was a professional jazz musician.
Oh, wonderful.
I wasn't have any exposure to popular music. But, my dad was very into Wagner and Bach and a lot of that sort of stuff. And then when I started kind of discovering music for myself outside the house, I was a skateboarder at the time.
Nice.
So it was all thrash and punk. But I still liked a lot of the stuff that had a lot of narrative element and that had a lot of that sort of, Sturm und Drang, the sort of power of classical music that I liked.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I was totally into bands like 13-year-old me was super into like Slayer, Faith No More, Megadeth, Iron Maiden, that kind of stuff, Napalm Death, just a lot of, I liked a lot of thrash and sort of speed metal. This is, back in the early 90s, basically.
Sure.
So, and it just kind of progressed from there, as far as like my interest in metal. I've always been very interested in electronic music, and it's always been kind of balanced with that. I spent a lot of time out here when I moved to Los Angeles in 1999 in the kind of local goth industrial scene.
Which is big in the LA area. I grew up in San Bernardino, right outside of LA, so yeah. Goth industrial, a lot of the kink stuff, big stuff out in LA.
Yeah, and my personal, like the area of metal that I'm kind of the most interested in is like melodic.
Okay.
So, you know, I've always been a big fan of a lot of that stuff. You know, I think when making up a list for stuff that of, you know, songs and such that you know, that we get submitted to you, I tried to put in some things that were more specifically related to kind of fantasy inspirations related to metal. But there are a few things in there that kind of are just things that were super influential on me. And like one of those is Carcass's Heartwork album from 1995.
Oh yeah.
Which is, you know, to me, that's one of my like holy grails of like favorite albums ever, you know. So,
nice choice. Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of the, you know, and as there were further waves of, black metal, I got interested in that. There is some sort of stuff that I like that I guess you call like deathcore or like, you know, tech death or, you know, progressive death metal.
Mm-hmm.
I like a lot of that sort of stuff. And yeah, and I've always, you know, a lot of the times the stuff that I've been most attracted to is stuff that has a lot of its own narrative, you know, or things that are very proggy. You know, people are often going to do the sort of concept albums or things where there's a sort of story that unites everything on the record. So yeah, you know, the stuff that we're doing with the Red Opera is, you know, that's totally my wheelhouse for that sort of stuff.
I bet it hit the nail right on the head for you, because I'll never forget the first time I listened to the Red Opera. It took me for an entire ride. Like it was just because I'm big into death metal myself. I like a lot of the brutal death metal, some of the slam, you know, and I grew up on like Cannibal Corpse, and of course I had my early stuff influences with Slayer and a lot of thrash, Anthrax, but yeah. Today's day and age, it's all like very brutal death metal, a lot of the tech death that you were talking about. But when I heard the Red Opera, it took me aback a little bit, because it was exactly that. It's a metal opera, but it's done so well that it's entertaining to your ears. It makes you think a lot. You know, it's very thought-provoking to the listener. And like you said, the entire album ties itself together into one great, fantastic story. What was your first experience when you first discovered DiAmorte?
Well, I discovered it through Rick. My connection to it was not a metal one, but you know, I mean, Rick and I have talked a lot about the music that we like, and that's we met at Gen Con, which is a big RPG convention.
Cool.
And found out we had a lot of music tastes, among other things, in common. And so that's why he contacted me to, you know, be involved in the Red Opera stuff. And he says, oh, well, you know, one of the big things is it's all taken from this concept album that's already out by this band. And he's like, oh, you know, they're a sort of symphonic metal band, you know, that has had some members that have been in other bands like Cradle of Filth or, you know, Black Crown Initiate and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was like, at first I was like, oh man, I want to like this stuff, but I've kind of bounced off of some of that genre in the past when it comes to like power metal or symphonic stuff. You know, people find out that I'm into gaming, and they like a lot of the sort of dark fantasy and horror imagery that I use in my games, and they're like, oh, you'd love Dimmu Borgir, or you'd love this or that, you know, band that uses that stuff. And sometimes I find them really, really hokey. So I was kind of, I was a little concerned, you know, and
sure.
But then I listened to the album and I was like, wow, this is really, really good, you know. And there are some things on it that are, you know, very traditional for, you know, that for its genre, but you know, they didn't offend me in the same way that sometimes other stuff has, you know.
Yeah.
I just found myself listening to it again and again while I was reading the stuff, you know, for this book that's in development, and I was really I liked how a lot of the you know, I mean, when I listen to metal, quite often I'm working on, you know, fantasy stuff, and there are things that that I'm like, oh well, you know, I can totally I get very inspired by it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's how I felt about this stuff. You know, I thought that, well, but sometimes there's this issue where, like, as good as the metal stuff can be, it's really only useful for you can't kind of use it as a background soundtrack necessarily in the games. You know, because if anytime there are vocals, whether it's clean vocals or, you know, even growled vocals, it immediately takes people out of, you know, playing the game. And
takes them out of character and kind of breaks down that fourth wall for sure.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the times there's plenty of metal that I can listen to, but I could never necessarily use it in a game. But with the Red Opera, they have an orchestral instrumental version as well. So it's very cool. I can listen to this, the proper version with the vocals and lyrics and all that while I'm writing stuff. Or players of the game could listen to that stuff as well. But then there's also there are versions of the tracks that can be used as, the sort of sweeping orchestral score that you used to be hearing in like a movie or a, sort of prestige television or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are multiple versions of it, and I was that just blew me away. And the book itself, when you're setting up to play with your players, there are QR codes on some of the pages, like at the beginning of a chapter or whatever, and you can just scan that QR code, and it takes you a link to one of the appropriate song, whether it's an orchestral version or not. So very, very easy for people to integrate that version of the score, into their actual games, as well as just listening to it for fun or whatnot.
Which is amazing because, like you were saying, listening to a lot of other metal soundtracks or albums, if you will, it kind of breaks down that fourth wall, whereas quick QR code scan, and now you're building up more of the story that you're trying to verbalize, and you're building, because I heard the orchestral version of the album, and it's fantastic, and it'll kind of almost paint that picture for you, like, let's say, as you're kind of setting up the next chapter for your players to progress throughout the game. If you have a dead spot where, the DM is doing his thing and setting up his or her thing, I should say, and the music plays perfectly into it, and I don't know if anybody has ever really accomplished that, bringing music into the RPG world like that.
I've seen some other examples, but I don't think they were as good in their execution as this. Sometimes it's somebody who is, they're not really professional musicians. They're people who are designing these games, and they may also be in a band. But they're kind of two worlds when it comes to that stuff. Whereas I feel like in this case, the album was written first, and then not with the intention of being something for a role-playing game. It had imagery in it that would be right at home in one of these games, as far as the sort of dark city, with two sides and stuff having to do with relationship between warlocks and the patrons who were granting them their power, and all that stuff was in the was in the existing material. It wasn't created to serve a kind of mechanical narrative purpose to tie in with something. So it has a lot of that strength. And I mean, I've used music in my games, since the 1990s, really, whether that's just putting the CD on, with a specific song on repeat in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I would use a lot of stuff like sort of Dead Can Dance or Nine Inch Nails or, often instrumental, or even like old Typo Negative we would use in our vampire games and that kind of stuff. And these days, I subscribe to services that are kind of like soundboards, where, you've got atmospheric stuff in the back, like the sound of people marching or plates clinking or sort of eerie tones that sound like, magical fonts of power, or, the sort of soundboard with ambient stuff. And they'll have loops of music, minimal music sometimes in that. So I'm used to using, music in games, but to have it already be designed from the ground up, like when you're in the second chapter of the Red Opera playing the game, there's ambient music in the background, which is, of course, related to what's going on in the narrative. That chapter was written with that song in mind,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit, because being that you are quite the RPG player, have you had time to sit down and create some fresh characters with this game? Because I'm sure that you've gotten more than just the first chapter preview, which is available to anybody under the Kickstarter.com page. But like you said, you've been diving into the book. Have you done any character creation? Have you done any like faux
I have
gameplay?
not yet. I haven't, but I mean, the reason for that being that I've been spending a lot of time on learning, the kind of nuance of some of the big important characters, what they call NPCs, right? The sort of non-player characters that the characters will interact with. But as a storyteller, I like to leave a lot of room in the narrative for my actual players. The characters that they're making, those are the main characters of the story. So I always have to be very careful to not eclipse them in that way.
Sure.
I'm playing all the monsters and all the antagonists and all of their allies and all the other sort of stuff, and those are plenty characters for me. I have talked to Rick. When these games are written, you're encouraged as a storyteller to insert your own original material into what the author's already providing you with.
Right.
And I'm sure I'm going to do some of that. I do have some other characters, including Warlock characters from other games, other storylines that I've done that are not in this campaign setting that would fit very well in them. And Rick is like, oh, you got to put so and so in. If you like, if you want to show sort of diversity in the different styles of Warlocks, he'd be great. But a lot of that is really like I'm just kind of using it to fill in after we really spend our time on who the players' characters are, because I like to keep them very centered in the story.
And speaking of the fact that you brought up Warlocks, that this game is heavily driven on Warlocks. It's not all Warlocks. Like, of course, you can be a Paladin if you want, or make up different player characters, but it is very centered around the character of Warlocks, which to date hasn't been a favored character amongst some of the people in the RPG world.
They've always been my favorites, but I agree that there is a kind of
there's a bit of a stigma.
What they are in the narrative as well. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I think that originally the rules for a lot of the Warlock stuff, I think they were designed primarily to serve as antagonists. It's one of those things like necromancers. Yes, necromancy is a school of magic. In Dungeons and Dragons and in a lot of other RPGs, but I think some of these things are often designed to be well, these are the guys who are doing the evil stuff,
Yeah.
But in of course, they're always going to be popular with people who want to play anti-heroes or people who are not going to follow the traditional power structure for acquisition of power. And contemporary, Warlocks don't need to necessarily be evil. Their patrons run the full gamut of behaviors. You can have Warlocks who are serving a sort of arch-fae, which is kind of like an elven lord or a sort of mystical being, which might be unknowable in some ways. Certainly not human, but not necessarily evil. And then there are Warlocks. Even if you are serving an evil patron, that doesn't necessarily make you an evil person. I mean, sometimes you're just doing what you need to do to survive,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that people are going to enjoy. People have always enjoyed, Warlocks as a choice, regardless of the stigma. But one of the things that the book aims to do is not just provide an interesting story and setting, but also additional options that people can take into their own game settings as well, and expand. What can a Warlock be, and to further kind of define a lot of that relationship between the patron granting the power and the Warlock, using it. So hopefully it'll be a useful supplement for people who aren't even interested in playing that story specifically, but would like to flesh out how Warlocks work in their own worlds.
Yeah, very interesting outlook on that. I appreciate that. Something else that really caught my eye about this game is not just the graphic artwork that comes with it, but the maps. The entire town where all this takes place. It took me back. It was very nostalgic when I first took a look at them, and God, if it doesn't make me want to play again. It's been well over a decade since I picked up a pair of dice and rolled my natural 20, and God, it really makes me want to play again. And what do you think about some of the artwork and some of the maps, and what are some of the things that they're doing a little differently with this game that you appreciate as opposed to some of the other genres like Dungeons, Dragons, and Rifts and things of that nature?
Well, one thing that's really interesting that the artists arrived on was they wanted to make 3D models, digital 3D models of a lot of the things to use. I think initially they were talking about, just having them for like lighting references for the artist to then go and make completed artwork.
Mm-hmm.
But they got so passionate about building, the city and the setting that it got to a point where it was almost like they evolved to being a lot like what pre-visualization is, as when concept artists are making things for animation or for live action filmmaking that has a lot of visual effects, where they want to kind of, they ended up making basically a sort of play set, which when they were playing around with it, it seemed even so rich on its own. They're like, well, why don't we let that drive a lot of what we're making? And just playing around with it. So now there are all of these assets, instead of just saying, do we have a picture of this character, or do we have a view of what this building looks like, from the front or whatnot, to show the players, we can even have things where they can look at a 3D model of it, or we're planning to do some interesting things with, if you look on the Kickstarter page, you'll notice that a lot of the artwork are not static images, they're GIFs. They're short video loops, where you can follow almost like kind of like a bird's eye view. If you want to go look at, this Hall of Justice or this particular inn or location, when you click on it, it'll fly you there, and you can see the building and rotate around it. And that's just incredible, because they're kind of they're building things from the ground up in a way that like you would for, a video game or something else like that, where you're like, well, I'm not sure what we're going to need yet, so let's make these tools that let us, if we need something at a different angle, and then the byproduct of that becomes even more immersive, for the players. Even if the game is a storytelling game where you're describing these places, being able to, if your players if their characters have visited a particular place, when they're not in the game, they can even go and look at it and fly around it, and so that's really incredible to be able to do that. I think that I'm glad that they humored those artists who were like, oh, now we got to let us build the whole thing. Let us build it for real,
Well, if I know Drake, I'm sure somebody said that and he was like, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's stellar artwork in that sense. A lot of the videos that you were talking about, I watched it. It was very reminiscent of Final Fantasy VII for me, like some of the like drone,
like Midgar, yeah,
like some of that drone looking footage, how it kind of, like you said, the bird's eye view, how it swoops in, and it's such a stellar campaign that they're building here, and I cannot wait for it.
Yeah, I think there are some other influences that I can see very readily in it, like Diablo seems like a big influence on a lot of the aesthetics and stuff in it. So I think about, the way that sometimes isometric views of maps or artwork, we're kind of, as people who've played a lot of video games now, there are certain things we're sort of trained to expect, and we get a big reaction to seeing them, and they feel very fulfilling. So having these three-dimensional assets is just amazing for the artwork. And I think when they're deciding what to depict in the artwork, it gives them a lot more flexibility and choice too. They can go in with one idea of, that might be a little bit more general, and then when they actually start playing around with the stuff, they get inspired to do something new and different that they hadn't initially thought of, because they didn't, before they actually saw how these things behaved, like size relationships or any other kind of stuff. So I think that it's just cool that a lot of the role-playing game world is keeping pace in some ways with using new technologies. With the pandemic going on, all of the games that we play have been moved into being done basically over conference calls. So that's
people
another
are
example.
Zooming their D&D games for sure.
Yeah.
And thank God that we have the
So-
technology at this point, because I mean, otherwise we might be back to the playing tax type thing, out there with the stick in a can, rolling a rock down the street.
Yeah. I mean, when a lot of this started, I was so sad. I was like, so much of my life revolves around going to other people's houses, or going to a studio space to film something, to stream, to play in these games. And there were a few weeks where I was settling in, where I was like, oh wow, my life is so fundamentally changed now that I don't have that social outlet. And then people started moving all of their stuff, online. And it'll be okay. It's going to be all right.
Everything's going to be fine
in the meantime.
Everything's going to be all right. We just need to kind of shift things around a little bit. It's all going to work out. Well, Alcuin, so obviously they didn't have me interview you just because they wanted like a professional gamer to come on and give bullet points on the game. I have a pretty good feeling that Drake and Rick have also brought you on board for some things here in the future. I don't know how much of it you can get into, because there's so much information with the Red Opera and DiAmorte as a whole, as a band, as the RPG, as the Kickstarter is going out and all this. So much information flooding back and forth. But if you can kind of give us a little insight as to how you've been introduced into the camp of DiAmorte and the Red Opera campaign. What will you be doing for the RPG itself?
Well, I mean, my background is in streaming, so I think you can expect something related to streamed content that you can watch, on Twitch, and also maybe on YouTube, of Red Opera being played. So part of it is that at this point the project, I think, had a very, very modest goal, which has now been funded and
surpassed.
It's surpassed by multiples at this point.
Yeah.
But a lot of the fun in these Kickstarters are the stretch goals.
Yes.
And that's where you get something where and that's one of the cool things about Kickstarter is once you've covered this is the base product that we're going to make and everybody's going to get this, you can start to see the enthusiasm that the community has for it. And I think one or multiple of the stretch goals related to the project could be to commission people like myself to make things for other platforms and other media that let people experience the game. So
yeah, and on that subject, it was great to see. I knew that the Kickstarter would reach its goal. I had no doubt in my mind.
Oh, but I was a sure thing.
To see it be fully funded in the first 40 minutes of the Kickstarter going live was breathtaking. Here we are 4 days into it, and they've already reached their first stretch goal, which means that there's going to be extra content produced to follow along with the book. They're now looking at their second stretch goal, and this thing can just turn into a monster, and I'm so looking forward to it.
I mean, I think that one thing is with Kickstarters, you're not pre-ordering a product. In many cases, it's a promise. People are trying to fund these projects, and I think people go to Kickstarter at different points in their development, and because this is already backed up by having an existing album that had been made, and Rick had already spent multiple years since that album came out in 2018, working on the story and working with the band and Drake. So I think that, and as we were talking earlier about how incredible all the artwork assets and all that stuff is. So when you have that level of production and polish, I think it inspires so much confidence. People, they're not just saying, well, gee, I hope this thing gets made. I'll support it. And, maybe a couple years down the line, after many mishaps and excuses, I'll get something that is partially like what I'm expecting. Whereas when they see something like, the Red Opera, where it's already in such a complete state and so much of it is so far along.
The story's already written, that they have the books ready to start publishing and put into production. They're really just tying up the loose ends at this point and getting the funding to make it all happen. Yeah,
and I mean, I think, of course, I don't want people to, kind of sit on their hands and not go support it because they think it's a sure thing.
Oh no, by no means. Get out there and hit that.
But I mean, by supporting it at this stage, you'll be getting those products at a much cheaper price than you would if you were pre-ordering them, or if they were just normal sort of retail items. So there's that. And I do think, because so much of the groundwork is so established, if the community is passionate about it, some of the stretch goals could be very ambitious to do things that are very, very cool that people are, not expecting to be done at that scale, for something that is an RPG book on Kickstarter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that because, like you said, getting in early on the Kickstarter, God, I'm trying to scroll down fast enough. If you get in early, it is extremely affordable. I mean, you can just purchase or throw in $1 and just be honored with the tier-specific Discord tag. But like even the $30 tier, you get the RPG in digital PDF, and I'm making just at $30, you get the book, you get the game, and you get everything that you need to start. But you can go all the way up to $2,500, I believe. Oh no, there's so many different. $5,000 as a sponsor.
Oh yeah, there is at least one tier where you are a patron. Where you are going to be. A character will be designed around you to be part of the story and be in the book.
I think that's so amazing.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, that might seem exorbitant to some people, but for a lot of people, they grew up playing these games and being immortalized in one of them, especially one that is so kind of designed by their interests, around their interests. They're like, that has real value to them as, they've got something, it's more than just something tangible. But yeah, so I think having the just the PDF of the book, the digital version, be so affordable is going to be great. Most of the people I know, even if they, like collecting the actual physical media and having the book, especially in some of the versions that are, there are some very nice versions of the book you can get that are just cool objects, just something like you would have an art book or a coffee table book. To just cherish the experience of it, but as far as actually running the game, a lot of people are just using their laptops anyway. So it's great to be able to just things like having it searchable or having links within the document. I can't say enough good things about digital versions of these books.
Absolutely, no, I totally agree.
And the integration with the music we were talking about too. That you can just click on something. When you're on that page, you're ready to start running that game session. Where's my music? Click on a link that's right there in front of you, and it's going to open up, the song that you need in your browser window.
Oh, again, this is getting me excited. Like I'm going to go out and get a set of dice, and it turns out that one of my colleagues, he actually has a group of people that he D&Ds with, and I was like, oh, really? Because they had just released the first chapter of the Red Opera, Last Days of the Warlock. And I was like, you should check this out. And I sent it to my friend. And they haven't gotten back together, obviously, because of the COVID thing. But pretty soon they're going to sit down. And he talked to his DM, and he's interested in checking out the first chapter of this, just kind of get back into, the swing of things with them. But no, it's absolutely epic. And Alcuin, I want to thank you so much. We're running out of time here, but I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on and giving us your opinion of what's going on. Real quick, before we go, though, please tell everybody where we can find you, some of your live streams, and some of the other projects that you're involved with.
Oh, yeah, sure thing. You can see me on the D&D Twitch channel, which is, twitch.tv/D&D. We're on a show called A Darkened Wish, which the second season of that just ended, but we will be coming back very soon for a third season of that. And then I'm also on another Twitch channel very frequently with some friends who help me produce games. And the channel is called Q Times. So that's twitch.tv/Q Times. That's spelled QUEUETIMES. So I do projects on there too. I have my own personal Twitch, which is different_elves. So those are some places you can look for me. I'm in a vampire show called Long Beach by Night. So you can search for that on YouTube. and yeah, lots of other places.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, I encourage everybody to come check you out, hang out on the Twitch, and drop some messages and enjoy some of your gaming experiences.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. Anytime you want to be on the show, dude, you've been a great conversation, and I look forward to checking out some of your work with the Red Opera when this thing goes full-blown live, and maybe...
Yeah, I mean, maybe next time we'll talk about some other bands, too.
Yeah. Oh, there's other bands? Shit.
Yeah.
Right on, Alcuin. Well, thank you very much, man. You have yourself a wonderful day.
All right, you too. Thanks, Walter.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.